Here we go. I've met everyone. Go.
We
Morning.
circled the
Morning,
grocery
Neil.
store parking lot and then went back.
Morning,
It's not
Julian.
quite that simple, but like when my son
Morning,
did
Adam.
his, he
Morning.
wasn't out maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Pretty simple. Just make sure
Somebody's got
they
a
know what
radio on. Maybe if you've just joined, if you could mute. Oh, that's better. Wow, that was loud. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Morning, Timothy. Morning, Ian. Morning, Con. Morning, Derek. Great to see you. Good morning, Israel. Morning, Chris. Morning, Adrian. Morning, Adam. Thanks for joining. As I've just said, if you've just joined, if you could mute, that would be great, because there was a lot of background noise a minute ago, but there we go. That's good. Adam, if you could mute, that would be good. Chris as well, that'd be great. Okay, that sounds a lot better. Whew. Excellent. Right, good morning, everyone. Happy New Year to those who I haven't said Happy New Year to. And I hope you all had great Christmas and New Year breaks. Welcome to this session, the Coffee Morning Pension Playpen, where we're talking about the wonderful world of CDC, the rise and rise of CDC. I'm delighted we've got a mini round table chaired by Henry, because Henry is, his middle name is CDC, Henry CDC Tapper. And we are joined by Chris Bumford and Tom McPhail on the mini round table. We have a lot of esteemed members on today's call. So it's a very hot topic, CDC, as we all know. And let me just let Nina in. Morning, Nina, and morning, Matt. So before we start, thumbs up, everybody. We are recording. Adrian, Ant, Podreg, everybody, thumbs up. Right, we are recording. So again, with Pension Playpen, we want this to be interactive. So I'm just going to mute possibly Nina, I think. We want this to be interactive, so please raise a hand at any point you'd like. And without any further ado, I'm going to pass over to Henry, who will put some more meat on the bone. So Henry, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. I've got one congrats to do. Well done, Lord Davis of Brixton. Excellent performance last night. Thank you very much indeed for your help in guiding us towards TAS 300 on the big picture DB. It was first rate, and also it's lovely to see old friends like Derek Benstead, who taught me most about what I know, what little I know about CDC back in the early 2000s. It's amazing. You think nobody's going to come along, and everyone comes along. So it's lovely. We've got best part of 50 people along this morning. And what we haven't done is brought along a whole load of slides to tell you how it is, because that's not how we go about things. But Chris Bumford, who I'm working with at the moment, I'm trying to find a way to deliver UMA's CDC in 2026, 2027. Obviously, there's an awful lot of people out there who are extremely interested in delivering UMES as a retirement CDC product, but I don't think that's going to be until 2028 as the earliest, unless some miracle happens. I know Julian Barker's on the call. Hi, Julian. We're going to have a meeting immediately after this, so I won't spoil anything for that as well. But what I wanted to give was a theme, if you like. We can kick things off and then other questions can arise. And the thing that Chris and I think about a lot is fairness. And can you share and be fair? Now, obviously, at one extreme, we all share the same rates through the state pension, whether we're men or women, whether we're ill or well, whether we've been working all our life down a coal mine, or whether we've been sitting in a plush office. We all get the same rate. So that's one extreme. And the other extreme is something like an annuity, individually purchased, where the amount of annuity you get depends on how well you are, and it depends on things like your postcode. Weirdly, the one thing it doesn't depend on is your sex. Even though we know that women live longer than men, they don't get any difference in terms of their annuity rates, but that's not quite the same in occupational pension schemes. So there's an interesting discussion to be had whether CDC can be or should be unisex rates, or whether it should be different rates for men and women reflecting their different lifestyles. These are the kind of things that go through our brains a lot when we're thinking about what we could deliver as a pension by way of CDC. And I hope that makes sense to everyone in the room. But if there isn't, stick your hand up and tell me that I'm talking a load of BO ... Right. Where do we think the chief areas of worry are? Well, one of them is if I'm running a company, take Stagecoach Aberdeen. Let's say both of them decided that they were going to go down the CDC route. Aberdeen, full of very posh people who've got long life expectancies and work in beautiful cushioned offices. Stagecoach, full of bus drivers who don't have such life expectancies. Would they live well together in one scheme, or should they have two separate schemes? And is there somebody who's going to produce a CDC scheme which suits bus drivers, and somebody who produces a CDC which produces office workers a pension? That's a question which we think about. Or is it fairer to say that everyone joins one pension scheme and those who live a long time get the benefit of living with those who have a short lifestyle? Cool. Interesting question. Perhaps one or two of you are beginning to think, blimey, what kind of CDC scheme would I be joining? And here's a really interesting one, because if you look at a recent corporate advisor report, which came out, I think it was published yesterday, it showed that I think no less than 5 of the large occupational DC master trusts are saying that they intend to deliver at retirement CDC scheme for everyone. Well, that's an interesting concept, because we've never had pooled mortality in DC before, and now we're going to have that. And how is everyone going to react to that? It's not quite the same thing as pooling your mortality via an annuity, is it? Yeah, there's more thoughts there. So that's me banging on for about 5 minutes, is what I intended to do. And I'm going to hand over now to my friend and buddy, Chris Bunford, who's got 2 advantages over me. First of all, he's an actuary and intelligent with it. And secondly, this is what he does for a living. So over to you, Chris. Have you got anything to add to what I've just said before we throw it open to everybody?
Yeah, no, thanks, Henry, and yeah, no, it's a great summary. And well, first off, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining. I mean, you never know where to pitch this, and having seen the great and the good of CDC on the call, then I know there's a lot of knowledge in there. I'm looking forward to some excellent comments and questions later, but also appreciating that this is new for some people as well. So, as a brief summary, collective defined contribution schemes, there's a set amount of contributions coming in, so that's like DC. And then members get a pension that looks like DB but isn't guaranteed, and the assets in the scheme always equal the liabilities. So we make the pension increases equal to the amount that makes the liabilities equal the assets of the scheme, and that calculation is key to the whole thing. So when we're talking about fairness, what we're talking about is trying to make sure that the member contributions coming in are reasonably equal to the member contributions going out, and there's various different degrees of fairness and various different ways of being fair that Henry mentioned. The mortality pooling is absolutely a key part of this scheme, and we're quite used to in DB schemes pooling mortality in a way that may or may not be fair. Basically, if you live a long time, it's very fair for you, and a bonus. And for those members that don't live quite so long, they maybe don't get quite the value of the money they put in. But it's fair at the point of outset, in terms of the idea is that you know, if assuming everyone lives the same period of time, the money in the pot is shared between everyone. A couple of other areas of fairness that we think about quite a lot, and one of those is age of the members putting money in. So the Royal Mail scheme has been fantastic and set up to produce a good wage in retirement for their members, and that does that fantastically well on a sort of more traditional DB basis in terms of like a 60th of pension of salary pension accrual kind of method. When we think about fairness, and if we're thinking about a UME scheme where there's unconnected multi-employers going into the scheme, we tend to think about fairness more along the lines of the contributions the members putting in matching their benefits. So what that would mean is it's cheaper to provide a pound of pension for a younger member than it is for an older member. So some of the designs we've been looking at are a lot more based on a younger member getting more pound of pension for every pound of contribution than an older member, sort of more fair value, if you like. So what we would be looking at is a kind of conversion rate for the contributions that members put in, which gives younger members a higher pound of pension for every £1,000 of contribution than older members, keeping that kind of fair value. As an actuary, that's kind of the numbers we do every day, but it may not necessarily be immediately obvious to people the fairness of that route. Henry mentioned sort of other areas of fairness, and things like gender are really important, because it was quite a jolt to the insurance system when males and females had the same level of annuity, when there was an expectation that they might live a different amount of time. When we're looking at the collective defined contribution pricing and looking at that for males and females, then we're expecting quite a lot of employers to want that to be the same for males and females as well, even if there is a sort of separate expectation for the amount of time that those members will live. And that can work for pricing in terms of you can make an estimate of the average and the likely population split between genders, but you then have also the thoughts of the valuing the pension and making sure that those pension increases do make the assets equal the liabilities. So would you use unisex mortality for that, or would you assume that the male members go in line with your expected mortality and longevity, and the female members separately? We think there's a good argument for using your best estimate. Well, the regulations require you to use your best estimate for valuing that, but that means there's a slight disconnect if you're using an unconnected multi-employer scheme, that if you had an employer that was wholly male members joining a scheme, that could look like and it was priced on an average basis, that could look like a win and push up the pension increases for that scheme. Similarly, if it was an employer that was female dominated, that could look like the valuation basis would show that there might not be enough money to pay the intended target increases and reduce those increases slightly. So there's a way of making it work and making it look sensible, but there are sort of other implications of using unisex factors and pricing, and that would also apply for things like transfer values and early late retirement factors potentially, and then using your best estimate sex differentiated mortality tables for valuation, if you like.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions, Chris, and the first of them is from the mysterious Elspeth, who I happen to know is Con Keating, who asks, well, have you considered linking contribution rates to expected longevity? So basically, we would underwrite you on the way in and say, okay, you look like a super long liver, you're going to have to pay more for the same rate as somebody who's coming in here who looks to us like having a short life. And I'm afraid this is a no-starter. It's not something that we can do, is underwrite contributions, even though there's an argument for doing so. But what people can do, if they don't feel like they're going to live very long, is they can take a transfer value from their CTV, so from their CDC, before they start taking their pension, and basically go their own way. And we expect certain people to break free from mutuality, if you like, or social insurance, which is basically what CDC is all about. So I hope that answers your question, Con, or is that not what you meant?
I mean, I guess.
I can imagine.
No,
Just to
that's
answer.
fine.
Sorry, Colin.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I can imagine that kind of differentiation happening more on the retirement only CDC that's being consulted on currently. So as it does with annuities, where people kind of input more of their health information and personal details, I can imagine that happening a lot more with the retirement CDC than for a whole employer, whole of life CDC.
Thanks very much. We've got a question from Porrick. Porrick, my dear chap, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Henry. Yourself?
Same.
Good. Something more simple, being a bear of little brain, but this is one of my bête noirs. And Chris, you've done it a number of times there. If you apply unisex, if you don't apply unisex valuation for your members, aren't you going to leave yourself open to claims of unfairness anyway? Because for the last 25 years, people have been deliberately conflating gender and sex to the point we've got in such a mess that you have used both terms to mean, I think, the same thing in the last few minutes. So can you just clarify that for me? Because I'm finding it hard to pick the bones out of it.
Yeah, so sorry if I have conflated terms and use those in the wrong manner. So without being an expert on that particular subject, the mortality expectation and tables are, I believe, based on sex at birth, gender at birth, and I've conflated the terms again. So sex at birth and the expected life understanding has been different depending on your sex at birth. So we generally, actuarial tables differentiate between your sex at birth and then how long you live. It's quite significantly different. It might be a period of several years. So if you are, when you're calculating how much your liability is, which is based on how long you expect someone to live, then the tables we have available and that we know about and use differentiate between that sex at birth and where the member is likely to go to, how long they're likely to live there. So for valuation purposes, we would generally allow for a difference on that basis.
Can I bring in another area where we've had quite a lot of conversations, and that's with employers who are unsure about who should benefit from the profitability of one of these things, because they're quite used to paying a set amount and being involved in master trusts, and they see the rates that they pay go down, but they know that there's still ultimately somebody on the other side who's getting all the value. And they're saying, well, we don't have a lot of say about how these master trusts, which we've joined, are run, and we don't have much skin in the game when it comes to profitability of these things. Is there any way that we could be more involved in something that you keep referring to as a social insurance, which is how we see CDC? So we've been giving this quite a lot of thought and thinking, actually, can we get to a situation where employers could be stakeholders in the ownership of a CDC scheme. And surprising to us, and happily, we've had some very constructive conversations with the FCA, who started something they call a mutual unit. And what they tell us we are interested in is called stakeholder contributory type schemes, which are a bit like dairies. So if you're a farmer, and you participate, if you like, in a dairy, you get rewarded on the amount of milk you bring during the course of the year, and that's your skin in the game. So we're quite interested in that model. Not only does it give the farmer, if you like, some of the profits, but it also allows the farmer to comment on a regular basis about how the dairy is run. And we would expect to see employers, especially larger ones, who've had some experience, if you like, of running pension schemes over the years, both DB and DC, to want to be much more involved in CDC, and that they would see that it as more fair that they were participating in this way than if they were excluded, if you like, because they had no skin in the game. And I'd be very interested to hear views of any of the large number of people on this call about whether there's any value in such things, or whether really it's not, it is not a goer. Okay. Well, Chris and I have gone ahead, but I'm aware of the fact this is a round table, and although I can't see them, I note that we have my dear friends Bobby Ridaway and Tom McPhail on this call. So have either of you two chaps a wish to jump in at this stage?
Yeah, Henry, I'll jump in. Thank you.
Hello, Tom.
Hi, and I'm conscious there are most, if not all, people on this call have greater expertise in the arena of CDC than I do. So I just acknowledge that up front. Just a couple of quick thoughts. I just scribbled down on a note transfer rights, and then you went and mentioned transfers. So that was happy coincidence. We have a system where we're asking people to save for decades, and we're trying to get schemes to run over periods of decades, and at the same time we give people the right to move their money at a day's notice. And if you read TPR's general code, it is staggeringly risk averse when it comes to DB schemes. I mean, low dependency is just designed to prevent pension schemes from investing in growth assets. Whereas CDC can do the opposite, but it's going to have its one hand tied behind its back for as long as members have the right at the drop of a hat to move their assets out of the scheme. Now, if you're running a big scheme, you can take a view on how many are going to do that at any one moment. But I just wonder whether the question of transfer rights is going to become a consideration in this system. I also just wanted to flag up the challenge. I mean, Chris's comments were really interesting around how you manage accrual rates. I absolutely agree. You know, you've got to have set contribution rates, and then you've got to find a way to modify the accrual rates at the back end. How you explain that to individuals is going to be a really interesting challenge. I guess for a lot of people, they don't really want to know the answer to that, but it's something that needs to be considered. But alongside that also is how you compare across schemes. If you start filtering membership at an employer level, you know, Aberdeen versus Stagecoach, to use your example, Henry, how do you then compare the returns on those schemes? You know, we've got the value for money framework in Train, and I think you're going to bump up against some challenges on that front as well. So that was it. I'm just going to stop there. So just a few thoughts I wanted to throw into the mix. Thank you.
Cool. Well,
I was ready to come in as well. When ready, if you want to answer that first, Chris, that's fine.
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to say, in terms of the, there's a few points there. I'll try and sort of pick some of them up. In terms of the Aberdeen versus Stagecoach thing, I think that it's a much easier conversation when the employers are very large, because they can have their own kind of sections in a CDC scheme, and basically, if they don't want to share experience, then that can work quite nicely. It's a much more difficult conversation with smaller schemes, because and then smaller employers, because if they haven't got the weight to have their own section in a CDC scheme, and you need to be quite large, there needs to be some substantial scale to have that, then their options are to share or to not do it effectively, and so we would love them to share. I think it would benefit members a great deal if they can share. The fairer that sharing can be would be great. So if there's like an industry wide section of a scheme, then that would be great. But for the smallest employers, it's probably more a case of being lumped in and gaining the benefits of CDC, accepting there might be a larger cross subsidy in terms of the mortality of the membership, I think.
Okay, we've seen evidence of interest on that corporate advisors survey. Organisations who felt that they would like to be a party of this include people like the Lewis Master Trust. Tim Lewis, a lovely bloke, but his Master Trust is full of very small employers. And so here we are beginning to see smaller master trusts and indeed GPPs thinking maybe a better way forward for us as an organisation, at least because we want to keep going, is that we use the exemption which you get as a CDC scheme to run without the size restrictions that we would have if we were master trusts on a DC basis. So I expect that we will see quite a lot of small companies finding themselves co-opted into CDC rather than choosing to be so, just because that's the way the Master Trust decides it wants to go going forward, either on a whole of life or much more likely on a retirement only basis. So that's where we are now. Your hand is up, Mr. Bobby Ridaway. Have you got something to say at this stage?
Yes. So first, it was on the mortality question. I think that's just a case of scheme. You can have scheme specific mortality, I think. So if you're a massive section, you can the mortality can also take account of location, which is also a big factor, not just and also socioeconomic factors. But you're saying you can probably do a scheme specific average if you had the data to do that. And smaller schemes, I think, yeah, you're right. The tables, just because the tables publish men's and women's, an average age mortality rate can be used. I don't see any massive problem with that. Going back onto Tom's question about transfer rights, I think we need to remember this: the comparison here shouldn't be relative to DB for transfer rights. The comparison should be relative to DC. DC, the assets vary massively. The thing with the really important point about this type of CDC is that assets equal liabilities all the time. So we will know, or you will know, the pot that is the member's pot on any one particular day. It's valued formally every year, but you will know it every day. So it's effectively, this is where the benefits of DB and DC come in. DC, the ability to run the risk early on to generate a higher asset value. With that, while you're not retired, you take this, your assets are going to vary. But once you get to retirement, you're getting a pretty fixed benefit, which is very similar to DB. So I think it's a really difficult communication point, though, Tom, and I totally agree. And I think CDC is going to have to be really upfront about this, about the transfer rights. But the other point is, because these are multi-employer schemes, there should be less need for a member to transfer. They shouldn't necessarily be transferring between schemes unless the industry gets it wrong. It should be more, even if you change employers, you still transfer, you still stay in the same CDC. or even you transfer it to another CDC. I don't know, but I think it's a difficult question, but we're making this better than DC. We're not. The CDC isn't DB. So I think the better comparison, the more appropriate comparison is looking at what you'd get in a DC fund if it was taking a long-term view.
Okay, Bobby, I think Henry, you're muted because there's a lot of background
Thank
noise.
you. I was muted.
Yeah.
I'm going to use my chair privilege to introduce Simon Eagle, only because, Simon, you've had the experience with Royal Mail and Willis Towers Watson. You've got a perspective on this that'd be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, hi Henry, and hi everybody. You want me to comment on the transfer values point?
Well,
that
transfer on
Tom
whatever you like,
raised and
old boy.
others?
Yeah, no.
I mean, the current CDC schemes, there is legislation around how you calculate transfer values. They've got to be a share of the assets. I agree with Tom, it's hard to explain to members how you calculate them. It's an actuarial calculation. I guess you get the same with defined benefit schemes, that you can try and explain to members how you calculate a DB CTV, but most members aren't going to get anywhere near understanding it. And it's a similar situation here. I agree with Bobby. We're not expecting there to be lots of transfers out of CDC schemes. Hopefully there won't be lots of them. Are other aspects you wanted me to comment on, Henry, on transfer values?
I don't want you to comment on anything unless you want to. But I mean, I agree with what you say. Personally, I would think about it. I would wonder whether I was getting fairness if I was being co-opted into one of these things. And I would probably say at the end of the day, that's all right, because that's the way most people work. But what we don't want to see is situations where people say, that's not right. Yeah. So it's really important we don't allow people to think that what they're doing is unfair. And there are people out there who will need or want to opt out of these things, and they've got to be treated with respect. Even if people like myself and Derek Benstead and you and Chris and a lot of other people are big fans of these things, doesn't mean that we're necessarily right. There's got to be, if you see what I mean, there've got to be people who've got the right to turn around and say, we want to go another way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's really important that these schemes can say how they're fair, and the Royal Mail scheme is fair in one way. UMES schemes would be fair in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
On the point we were discussing earlier about a conversion rate, should they vary by employer, where they're two very different industries, bus drivers versus investment advisors? I think that they should. I think it's hard to say the scheme's fair if you don't vary those conversion rates by industry, and you can do that. You could, because the conversion rates are actuarial factors, you can base them on life expectancies for that specific industry. I think if you don't do that, you get accused of causing the reverse Robin Hood effect, where you're giving the same conversion rates to the wealthier and on average longer life expectancy individuals as the less wealthy, lower life expectancy individuals, and most people would agree that that's not fair. So I think you should allow it for industry, even in the UMES schemes where members are accruing benefits.
That's very interesting that you say that. I think we got James Franklin Adams saying much the same. I think accrual rates can vary by employer. So do take into account mortality differences. I don't know if that's an instruction or whether that's an offer, but actually it's quite an expensive business when you start building a scheme up with lots of different sectors, because each sector has to be regulated differently, there's different and greater costs, and of course there may be no benefits. So it's an interesting one to think about, one which we're going to have to do a lot of thinking about as to whether or not we're better off sharing than not sharing and giving everyone their own individuals. Do you see the point there, James, Simon?
Yeah, I agree with what Simon was saying. You can different employers can have different rates at which you accrue the pension, the CDC pension, which will make it fairer. And when it comes to retirement, CDC, you'll do it by individual, and then it's up to the scheme how much they decide, how deeply they look into it, how complex they make it to decide how long each person is going to live and how much data they want from each individual. So it is very much about making sure that it is as fair as possible without being too onerous, I think.
Henry,
Okay.
we've got a few hands up.
Got some hands up. Should we go to Adrian first?
Yes,
and we'll come to Rosalind? That'd be good.
I
Let
totally
ladies
agree.
get involved. Let the ladies get involved, Henry.
I was about to say we haven't had any female voices so far, but I'm going to take Adrian because he was first, and then let's go on to some lady voices. Adrian.
Henry, thank you, and morning, everybody. I wanted to circle back to Tom's points on transfer values. I got a couple of things I wanted to say. The first was, I think Tom kind of implied that it's a bit odd that you got this sort of right every day to have a transfer value and take your money away out of a long-term investment, and maybe that will restrict the schemes in terms of what they invest in. And I thought it was just reflecting on the fact that this is an occupational pension scheme rather than an FCA regulated scheme. If you're in a group personal pension plan, I think FCA expects you to pay the transfer value on the day, and that's that. There's no excuses. If you're in an occupational pension scheme, then you can, as trustees, apply to TPR for a relaxation on the time frame, and the sort of thing which they might take into consideration is if your scheme had taken on a number of unlisted assets and you had a lot of members wanting to leave, then it might be appropriate to say it's in everybody's interests to delay those transfers while those assets are realized in a sensible manner rather than a fire sale manner. And that's a TPR discretion that they can exercise if the trustees apply to them. So I think there's a little bit of help there for occupational pension schemes. The second thing I wanted to say, which interests me, is the statutory right to transfer out of a CDC scheme follows the occupational pensions legislation. So you have a statutory right to transfer out up to the day that you retire, and then your right falls away. It would be down to the trustees of the scheme to decide whether they allow for transfers in retirement or not. I hope many of them will, certainly in the early years of retirement. I find it odd that you have a system within pensions, and it's existed in DB pensions, that with the long length of time that people are retired for today, which could well be 25 years, you think they're going to fix themselves to one financial product and last for 25 years in it. Their needs might well change during those 25 years. Maybe what seemed like a CDC pension scheme at retirement, which looked like a good fit for their needs at the beginning of their retirement, is not a good fit for their needs after their retirement has changed partway through. I hope that we will see schemes allowing transfers in retirement, although I know it brings with it a number of questions around, remaining mortality and remaining longevity. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Adrian. Some fascinating questions.
Oh, you're muted again, Henry. Rosalind, let's ask you.
Sorry.
Yep, go, Rosalind.
Stop muting me.
Thank you very much. I had a comment and then a question. Henry had asked if people had thoughts on this idea that if you had effectively a master trust CDC scheme, whether having some skin in the game for employers would be something that would be attractive. I have a nervousness about that because I think you made a very valid point that that's obviously a really something that would very much be available to large employers. Most people are not employed by large employers, or at least a majority of people are not employed by large employers these days. And I think we increasingly have a nervousness from people that you know, if that they're effectively being bullied by big companies. So I can see a real problem with what you might end up with something that's a bit two-tier. And I think one of the great things about master trusts is that they're not. It doesn't matter who your employer in, you're in that master trust to some extent. My question is an actuarial one, and since there are lots of actuaries here, and I'm looking straight at you, Chris, at this precise second. My understanding on the case law around annuity rates not differentiating on the grounds of sex is that was based on an understanding at the time, or certainly the part of where the court was coming from was an understanding that it isn't that by being a woman I live longer. On the whole, it appears to be that many things that kill people are done more by men, and many things that make you live longer are done a bit more by women. As I understand, the reason it's shrunk over time is because women have started doing all the crazy things that men do, because yay, equality. So my understanding was that where the court was coming from on that was a bit of, look, guys, it's not like you're basically using a crude instrument, which obviously we have to do entirely with these types of things. Can we not use other crude instruments, and can we not make it a little more sophisticated and a little less crude? So I suppose my two questions are: is that right? Is it that, as far as we can tell, a lot of the women living longer is to do with other things that happen to be more or less true about men or women? Or is that just not correct? And secondly, are we seeing more sophistication in this modelling? Because I'm always surprised at how unsophisticated it often is, and how people are nervous about using things like postcodes. But a postcode to me also feels a bit crude. I live in a postcode which has a lot of different socioeconomic groups and a lot of different lifestyles within it. And is it possible to do something that is a little more sophisticated, or is that just way too expensive?
Well, I'll take that question, Rosalind, as it was directed, but I'm not sure the first part is actuarial. It feels a little bit more. I might ask my doctor, but one part I would say is I'm not sure we hugely care in terms of what the reason for the difference is. If it's going to persist, then the differences are there from a purely mathematical perspective. But I can completely see the point that if there is no underlying reason and things are moving in future towards equality in that respect, in terms of equal longevity, then that will be allowed for. But the projections that are done by the CMI team and the other mortality teams that are out there are kind of trying to build in what has happened from experience and where they think it's going to go in future. And in all the mortality tables we use, one of the key things is the projection going forward, and there's an element of choice in there for the person using it, that of how they think that's going to move. So hopefully that sort of answers the first part to a certain extent. With regard to your second point, Rosalind, I'm just trying to grab that back, because I was so focused on my first part of the question.
I was saying are we getting it? Does it make sense to do more sophisticated modelling and say, you know, short people actually live less long? Let's let's give them a better annuity. I speak as a short person.
Cool. So, I mean, there would be benefit in that to getting pricing more accurately, as Simon and James have discussed, in terms of, you know, there's a whole heap of factors that relate to people's future mortality. I think there are difficulties. How granular do you go? And I mean, I hate filling out forms, and it's all personal data. So you know, there's an element of how far are we actually going to go, and how much do people want that when they're filling things in. There's also a little bit of an element of a lot of the people involved CDC schemes haven't got pensions at the moment, so a lot of the people are going to be at below retirement age, and there's going to be some quite young people, and their mortality might change quite significantly due to events over the coming years. So when I mentioned earlier, I can see a lot more underwriting and investigating people for retirement only CDCs. I think that's because there's generally a lot greater difference between the mortality of people as they get older, depending on their fitness, than younger people. But it could well be worthwhile, Rosalind. I think there's just have to be an economic reason for people to do that, and to think that the differences between individuals are important enough to investigate that further. Don't know if anyone else has got any comments on that.
Thanks, Bobby. Tom, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I think the insurance industry does a lot more of this than the pensions industry, and I think over time, hopefully, with the likes of CDC and Master Trust and Retirement CDC, there'll be a lot more common ground. So I think, coming to your point, Rosalind, it's already gone past postcodes. When you go into insurance, they can do it by street. The biggest driver isn't the actual house you live in; it's how much that house costs and how much salary you're on, etc. So it's already down to that level of detail. But that's been driven by the insurance company, and there is a lot more joint collaboration here between the pensions and insurance. So I think by the time these young members retire, I think mortality will be able to tell you pretty much what mortality expectation there is for each individual. Whether you use it is a different question.
Okay,
That's
Bobby,
a really interesting point, Bobby. I was reflecting as you guys were talking on the challenges of getting people to fill in medical questionnaires when we're selling them individual annuities, which has been a long, slow, hard battle over the years to persuade people that it was actually in their interest to share this information with us. And to your last point, I mean, clearly a CDC scheme based around a population in Blackpool is going to have a very different mortality experience to one in Dorset. So then my question is, well, how big a scale do you have to go to before everything just becomes, you can get to a nice aggregate number where it's not going to make that much difference, right? So how big does that pool have to be for you to be able to say, well, we just actually don't care about the individual data anymore. We can take a reasonably robust view of an average mortality across a population. And is there any way that you can use, so coming back from that, if you're going to introduce an element of individual underwriting to inform your views around mortality, I think asking people to answer questions is indeed going to be super challenging. Is there a technological solution available to us now? I've been listening on the radio driving over here this morning about the government abandoning ID cards, about which I'm not unhappy. But that sort of technology should allow us to make informed views on mortality expectations for a population. Do you do it at an employer level? Do you do it at a geographical? I don't have an answer to this, but I'm going to stop there.
I think you get a bit more time with the younger members in the CDC. When you get to retirement CDC, these issues become much more relevant. Well, much more relevant, much more short term and much more important. And you're going to get, for example, mentioning that some schemes might pay transfers, some might not, some might have different investment strategies, etc. The thing the insurance industry is very aware of is selection. As soon as you start having differential rates in retirement CDC, then clever people will select, and clever advisors will help them select. And then you find that they start having problems with pricing.
Well, there's
Thanks,
some really
Bobby.
interesting points coming up here. So I
I
have noticed that JS.
Hang on, Henry. Can we go to John,
Please.
because he's had his hand up for about an hour
That's
and a
what I
half.
was trying to do.
So I had two questions. You raised the issue of retirement CDC, and one question I had is, Chris, had you had any experience on dealing with the issue of proof of life in large multi-employer CDCs, or how you'd go about solving that? And then my other question was, you mentioned or alluded to this idea of employers having a stake in a CDC scheme, and I wondered how, in practical terms, could that take place without an employer having some sensitivity to mortality, unless they're becoming, in some sense, sort of a quasi-insurer, a quasi-life insurer.
Cool. So, I mean, in terms of proof of life, Johnny, I think you're talking about kind of the fact that pensions end up being paid for months and months after before you're alerted to members actually dying, and that would clearly be a negative experience for the scheme. But once it was alerted that the member had died, and if the money were able to be returned, then that would effectively be a kind of up the assets a little bit and could improve the pension increases going forward. So that's how it works. I mean, in terms of the mechanics of doing it, I haven't got a particular way of practically keeping an eye on proof of life. I know there are the traces out there, and there are tracing firms, but that would be the effect of it. That if it was paid for longer, the increases would be marginally lower than they should have been, and then once the money was returned, that goes back up, and the pension increase would increase again.
Sorry, can you remember? Sorry, can you remember what we said right at the very beginning? The most extreme example of sharing is the state pension, where there is no underwriting that goes on at all. And then the most extreme, we're talking about now, the capacity to actually understand the life expectancy of the people that we're underwriting to a pretty high degree. And then somewhere in between those two is the answer for those people you're trying to provide pensions for. And it's extremely difficult to know exactly where it is. And CDC is capable of offering a variety of types of fairness, some extremely precise in the way it underwrites, but pretty expensive and difficult to operate, and some which isn't so hard to operate, but may not be quite so fair. And these are, I think, the kind of questions that we ought to be having over the next year or so before we start going live with UMES on a whole of life basis, or maybe 2 years' time when we start actually launching retirement CDC, where it seems to me much more likely that we will need a higher degree of underwriting. That's what I've got from the conversation today. We said we weren't going to run this meeting on through to the end, mainly because my next meeting's with a whole load of people who have kindly come on this meeting as well. And I'm very grateful too. But before we quit, I'd really want to just put this to the 3 other people on the panel, starting with Tom, and then we'll go to Chris, and then we'll finish with Bobby. How about that? So, Tom.
I'm not sure there was a question in all of that, Henry.
No, have you got anything that came from the 55 minutes we've been going?
Thank you. No, so yes. Look, I as time has passed, and I've spoken to a number of people on this call individually about CDC and the merits of it, I've gone from deeply skeptical to increasingly convinced that it is a really robust and sensible solution to the way forward on UK pensions.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right?
I am surprised, yes.
Well, so am I, Henry. I think it has the potential to solve a lot of problems. But what also strikes me listening to this call is that the reservations I had from the outset around the complexities of things like underwriting and communication and transparency haven't yet all been resolved, right? So it's really interesting listening to Chris. You know, I think we're getting closer. But yeah, I'm just struck by the fact that even as the DWP juggernaut rolls on with the legislative reforms to make all this happen, we're still trying to work out what the answers to some of these really fundamental questions are. And I have no more to add than that.
Cool. No, thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone for the discussion. And yeah, it's like I say, just reiterate how great it is to see you all on here. I think one of the key points for me, and it's been brought out beautifully by so many of you, is that balance between fairness and simplicity. It's not a perfect solution. It's always a balance between that, and getting that right is going to be absolutely key. But there are some really good solutions in there. And it won't be the same solution for all employers and for all members, but that balance between getting the fairness right and making sure the scheme is simple and isn't too hard to break into will be absolutely key. But we're getting there, and we will get there. It's good stuff.
Thanks, Chris. I think Bobby's back now. Bobby, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
So what is your summary? And then I think we'll probably have to wind up, I guess, because Henry's got a meeting to go to.
Yeah, so my summary is we're actually back on discussing the proper issues that between fairness and value rather than legislation forcing us down a particular route. So I really liked what Adrian said about the transfer values, remembering that we're now having the ability to run something in the pensions world, which actually allows us to give members value and give them a pension is a really big plus for the industry. We've still got a lot of issues to sort out, as we've discussed, but to have that freedom to actually provide a pension to members by taking a long-term view in a pension environment is a massive win, in my view.
Cheers, Bobby. Thanks. I didn't ask any of my questions, and we are now 57 minutes in. So I think we might do CDC mini roundtable part dirt maybe next week or the week after. But it's a hot topic. It's a popular subject. I really appreciate Henry chairing today, and Chris's input, Bobby's input, and Tom's input. I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking them for their words of wisdom and their help. And the video of today will be up in the next hour on the Pension Playpen website under the media tab. And we hope you all have a great day and a great week. And hopefully we'll do this again very, very shortly, because I've got so many questions, but we've run out of time. So there we go. But
Okay.
Henry, thank you very much. I hope your meeting goes well at 11:30. And thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Simon, for your input. Thanks, Julian, as well. Thanks, Bryn, for joining, and everybody for joining. And I hope you enjoyed the session. We will see you next time. And let's pray for peace in the East. Peace in the East. So there we go. See you later. Bye.
Right.
Bye.
And see you,
Bye.
Julian. See you, Bryony. See you, Tom.
Bye.
And Chris too. All
Goodbye,
right.
Henry. Goodbye.